You've seen me undressed. Now you must marry me or they'll punish us both, said the Apache girl. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you were watching from. Las Cruces, New Mexico Territory, late spring 1879. The rain from the night before had left the dirt streets dark and heavy. The wagon ruts, filled with shallow water, reflected the weak morning light. The smell in town was a mix of wet earth, mesquite smoke, and the sour tang of beer drifting out from the saloon across the road. Cole Merrick stepped off the end of the street and onto the warped porch of the railman's boarding house. He was 32, lean and hard from years of work outdoors, his face carrying the kind of calm that came from surviving things most men didn't talk about. Once, he'd been a scout for the U.S. Cavalry during the Apache Wars. He'd ridden through country where no help would come if you made a mistake. That had taught him to read trouble before it happened. Now he worked for a freight outfit, guarding wagons between towns. Today, he was in Las Cruces to collect payment for a delivery he had overseen. Bolts of cloth, barrels of flour, and a crate of tools shipped from Mesilla. The job was straightforward. Get paid, pick up his supplies, head north by afternoon. Inside the lobby, a single oil lamp lit the room. The air was stale. A big man with a red, flushed face leaned back in a chair by the wall, boots crossed, chewing on a matchstick. Another lay passed out on a bench, an empty bottle resting on the floor under his hand. Cole gave them a nod and stepped toward the narrow hallway that ran to the back rooms. He had been told the owner would be in his office there. Halfway down, he stopped. There it was, a sound, too faint to be furniture settling, short, sharp, a woman's muffled cry. His pulse picked up, not fear exactly, more the tight focus that came when you knew you were walking into something that wasn't your business, but might need to be. He followed the sound until he reached a door with a bent latch and peeling paint. No lock. The frame was cracked, as if it had been forced shut too many times. He pressed his palm to the wood and pushed. The door swung inward with a slow groan. The room was barely bigger than a closet. One narrow cot, a tin basin on the floor, no window except for a small one nailed shut above the cot. The air smelled of damp cloth and unwashed skin. In the corner, crouched low, was a young Apache woman. She looked to be in her early 20s, her skin bronze, her long black hair damp, as if she had been sweating or had been outside in the rain earlier. She wore nothing but a thin, off-white linen shift, torn at the neckline and ripped high on one hip. The fabric clung to her body in the humid air. Her eyes locked onto his, dark, unblinking. There was fear in them, but it was buried under something sharper. Defiance, maybe even anger. Cole stopped in the doorway, his hand staying on the frame. He'd seen Apache women in many situations during the war, most of them bad. This one was different. There was no pleading in her look, just a clear warning. Don't mistake me for helpless. You've seen me like this, cowboy, she said, her voice low and edged, her English accented, each word deliberate. Now you must marry me or they'll kill us both. Cole's brow tightened. The words didn't make sense right away, but the tone did. He glanced over his shoulder into the empty hallway. Who's coming? They keep me here, she said. They say I'm not worth trade now. They'll sell me to the ones who kill fast. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands were tense where they gripped the hem of the shift. Before he could ask more, the hallway came alive. Heavy boots on the planks, the scrape of a spur. A man's voice, thick with whiskey, barked, "Time's up!" Another voice laughed, ugly and short. Cole stepped fully inside and shut the door with his heel. The noise in the hall grew closer. Someone tried the handle. "What's this?" a man shouted. "You think she's yours now?" Cole slid the rickety chair under the doorknob. He didn't answer. His mind was already moving through the choices. He could walk away, leave her here, tell himself it wasn't his fight, but the memory of other women in other towns, in worse rooms, came back hard. He looked at her and pointed to the small window nailed shut. "We can get out that way." She stared at him for a moment, weighing him. Men had given her orders before. Those orders had cost her. But this wasn't the same. His voice was even, his eyes steady. She gave a short nod. Cole crossed the room, pulled a folding knife from his belt, and worked it under the window sash. The paint cracked with a dry snap. He pushed until the frame shifted enough to open. He shrugged out of his trail coat and held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it, slipping it over her shoulders. The coat swallowed her small frame but covered her bare skin. A fist hit the door hard. The chair shook. "Out," Cole said, his voice firm but low. He lifted her by the waist, careful not to grab anywhere he shouldn't, and set her feet outside on the damp ground. Then he followed, dropping into the narrow alley behind the boarding house. The smell of wet dust filled his lungs. He took her hand, not gripping, just enough to keep her close, and moved quickly down the alley, past barrels, past the back door of the saloon. Behind them, shouts echoed, boots pounding in pursuit. At the far edge of the freighter yard, his wagon waited. A canvas top, a water barrel, a bedroll in the corner. He lifted her inside without a word, dropped the canvas flap, and climbed onto the driver's bench. The rain snapped. The team started forward, hooves splashing through puddles. The shouts faded behind them, but Cole didn't look back. He could feel her eyes on him through the canvas. He knew as the wagon rolled out of Las Cruces that his simple job had just turned into something else entirely, and there was no turning it back. The wagon jolted over a rut as it left the last of Las Cruces behind, the wet streets giving way to open, low hills strewn with patches of mesquite. Cole kept the team at a steady pace, not so fast as to draw attention, but quick enough that if the men from the boarding house gave chase, they'd have to push hard to catch up. The rain had cooled the air, but the heat was already climbing back in. His hands stayed tight on the reins, eyes scanning the road ahead and the scrub on both sides. Inside the covered wagon, Tahana sat cross-legged on the bedroll, Cole's trail coat wrapped around her like a blanket. The canvas top blocked the view, but she could feel the sway of the wagon and the rhythm of the hooves, each jolt making her grip the coat tighter. She kept her breathing even, though her chest still carried the sharp weight of the last half hour. In her mind, the faces of the men from the hallway kept flashing, laughing, drunk, certain they could decide her fate without her voice. That Cole had stepped between them and her didn't mean she could fully trust him yet, but he hadn't touched her except to help her out the window. That counted for something. She shifted the coat tighter around herself and looked toward the front. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. Cole didn't turn around. "North," he said. "I've got freight to guard up to Mesilla Springs. After that, we'll see where it's safe." "What will you do when we get there?" Her voice was flat, but there was something under it testing him, maybe. He kept his eyes ahead. "That depends on whether those men decide to follow. You got anyone who'll come looking for you?" "No," she said after a long pause. "No one left." Her gaze dropped to the floorboards. Cole had suspected as much. He'd seen too many raids leave nothing but scattered survivors, each carrying the same look, a mix of stubborn will and quiet grief. The road dipped toward a shallow wash. He slowed the team, steering them down the embankment, the wheels creaking as they rolled through a stretch of wet sand. He'd learned to use spots like this, places where tracks became harder to read. If anyone was following, they'd lose time figuring which way the wagon had gone. Once they were back on firm ground, he let the team walk while he pulled a canteen from under the seat. He glanced back, holding it out through the opening in the canvas. "Drink. It's a ways yet before we stop." Tahana hesitated, then reached for it. The water was cool, metallic from the tin, but it steadied her throat. She took 2 slow swallows before handing it back. "Why did you help me?" "I didn't see much choice," Cole said. "They were going to hurt you. I was there. That made it my problem." He paused, then added, "I don't walk away from that." Her eyes stayed on him for a moment longer before she sat back, pulling the coat tighter. She didn't answer, but something in her shoulders eased. By midday, the hills began to open into a stretch of flat, pale grassland. Cole found a stand of low trees near a dry creek bed and guided the wagon off the main trail. The shade here was thin, but enough to keep the heat from biting too hard. He tied off the team and climbed into the back. "Food?" he asked. She nodded once, though she didn't move until he set out a small tin plate with bread, dried beef, and a strip of hard cheese. He pushed it toward her, then took his own after. She noticed he gave her the larger share. They ate in silence at first, the wind rustling through the sparse leaves. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "They would have killed you too." Cole looked at her. I figured that's what you meant back in the room. They think if an Apache woman is seen unclothed by a white man, she's ruined. No worth to trade, no worth to keep. Her eyes hardened as she said it. And the man, they kill him for touching what they say belongs to them. Cole's jaw flexed. Doesn't sound like worth keeping any of it. They finished the meal without more talk. When the plates were cleared, he checked the harness and made sure the wagon was ready to move. Tahana, without being asked, folded the blanket neatly and set it against the wagon wall. She caught him watching and held his gaze for a moment before turning away. By late afternoon, they reached a small water stop, nothing more than a hand pump beside his shed. Cole refilled the canteens, glancing around the open ground. No riders in sight. That didn't mean they weren't coming. As the wagon rolled north again, the sun dropped lower, throwing long shadows across the trail. Cole knew they'd need to find a place to camp before dark, somewhere with enough cover that the light from a small fire wouldn't be seen. He also knew the next part of the trip would force them closer together. Same wagon, same fire, no walls between them. That could build trust or break it. He didn't know which way this woman would lean yet, but he knew one thing: the choice to help her back in Las Cruces had been made, and there was no undoing it now. The last light of the day bled low over the flats as Cole guided the wagon off the trail toward a shallow rise topped with scattered piñon and scrub oak. It wasn't much, but the ground here was higher than the surrounding plain, giving a view in all directions. If anyone was following, they'd see the glow of a fire, so he kept that fire small, just enough to boil coffee and take the edge off the cool night air. He unhitched the team, looping the reins over a low branch. The animals settled quickly, heads down in the patchy grass. Cole moved slowly and deliberately, checking each harness strap before setting out the bedrolls. The quiet work gave him time to think. He still didn't know the full story of how Tahana had ended up in that back room. He knew the shape of it: raids, trades, a chain of men who thought they owned her, but not the details. Part of him wanted to ask, to understand what kind of trouble might be chasing them. Another part knew pressing her too soon could close her off completely. Tahana stayed near the wagon at first, the trail coat wrapped tight around her, eyes following him as he worked. Eventually, she stepped closer, crouched near the fire, and began to arrange the bread and salt pork he'd set out. Her hands were quick, efficient. She'd done this before. Campfires, travel, moving from place to place, with little more than what she could carry. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to her before taking his own. "We'll ride early," he said. "Cover some ground before the sun's up." She nodded, sipping carefully. The heat from the tin cup rose between them. After a moment, she asked, "The men who had me, they'll follow?" "Maybe," Cole said. "Depends if they've got the nerve to ride past the sheriff's line." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "And if they do, then we deal with it when it comes." His voice was steady, not dismissive, and she seemed to take some measure of reassurance from that. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crack of the firewood and the low rustle of wind in the branches. Cole noticed she never turned her back to the open plain. Even when she moved to rinse her hands at the water bucket, she kept her face toward the trail, scanning it the way a scout would. When the food was gone, Cole reached for his coat, but she stopped him with a slight shake of her head. "I'll mend it first," she said. He hesitated, then handed it over. She drew a small bone needle from a pouch tied at her hip under the coat, threading it with practiced ease. By the firelight, she worked the torn seam near the shoulder where the fabric had split weeks ago. Her hands were sure, the stitches neat. It struck him that she was making the coat stronger than it had been before. "You sew like someone who's had to fix a lot with very little," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "If I waited for someone else to fix what was mine, I'd have nothing left." That sat between them for a long moment. When she finished, she folded the coat and set it beside him. Her eyes flicked toward the wagon canvas, then back to him. "In the room, you didn't look at me the way they did. Why?" Cole met her gaze. "Because I've seen enough of what happens when men stop seeing a woman as a person. I don't aim to be one of them." She held his eyes for another beat, then looked away, but not in dismissal, more like she was filing his words beside his earlier actions. The night cooled fast. Cole spread one bedroll on each side of the small fire, giving her space. She lay down, still wrapped in his coat, hair loose over her shoulder, eyes half closed, but alert. Cole sat with his back to a rock, rifle across his knees, watching the horizon until the last line of red faded to black. Hours later, when the wind picked up and the fire burned low, he glanced over and saw her asleep at last. For the first time since Las Cruces, her face was without the tightness of fear. He shifted the rifle, threw another stick on the fire, and kept his watch. Tomorrow they'd be deeper into open country, fewer places to hide, but also fewer men to cross. If they could keep ahead of trouble for another day or two, maybe they'd find a stretch of land where no one knew her name or his. He didn't know yet if she'd want to stay with him past that point, but tonight, under the small fire's light, it felt like she might. Cole woke before dawn, the kind of waking that came from years of sleeping light and knowing when the night was done. The air was cold enough that his breath showed in pale wisps. The fire had burned to embers, and the eastern sky carried the first thin gray light. He eased himself up from the bedroll, careful not to wake Tahana. She was still wrapped in his coat, lying on her side, one hand near her face, the other tucked under her. Her hair had slipped across her cheek during the night. She looked younger like this, without the hardness she carried when awake. He knew better than to mistake rest for peace. Sleep didn't wipe away what she'd been through. But it was the first time since the back room in Las Cruces that she seemed untouched by tension. Cole moved to the small water bucket, splashed his face, and began packing the gear. They'd ride early, put more distance between themselves and anyone still chasing. As he worked, he caught himself thinking back to her question from the night before. Why he hadn't looked at her the way those men did. It wasn't the first time someone had asked him something like that, but it was the first time he'd felt the weight of the answer matter. By the time the sun cracked the horizon, the wagon was ready. He boiled water for coffee, the smell drifting over the camp. That, more than anything, stirred her awake. She sat up slowly, pushing her hair back, and pulled the coat tighter around herself. "You didn't wake me," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Didn't need to," Cole replied. "I had it handled." She glanced at the gear lashed to the wagon bed. "You've done this alone for a long time." "Long enough," he said. He didn't add that it was easier alone, less to lose, fewer to protect. But as she moved toward the fire and took the tin cup he offered, he wondered if he'd been wrong about that. While they drank, he asked the question he'd been holding since Las Cruces. "How'd you end up in that room?" Her eyes stayed on the cup. "Taken from my people 2 years ago, traded between camps, sometimes sold, sometimes just given. Last ones brought me here. They said I was worth something if kept clean. Then one man tried to take what wasn't his. I fought, tore the shift. They said I was ruined." She looked up at him, and there was no self-pity in her voice, just the flat fact of it. "That's when they locked me in the room, deciding what to do with me." Cole nodded slowly. It confirmed what he'd guessed, but the hearing it made the stakes sharper. "You've got no one looking for you." "No one left," she said. He didn't press further. Some stories didn't need every detail told to understand the truth. They broke camp quickly. The trail wound through a shallow canyon for most of the morning, the sandstone walls hiding them from sight. Cole kept the pace steady, glancing back now and then. No dust on the horizon, no riders. Around midday, they stopped at a creek, narrow enough to step over but deep enough for water. Tahana knelt at the bank, washing her hands and face, then set to rinsing the shift she wore beneath the coat. She wrung it out and spread it on a rock to dry, her movements precise, practiced. Cole noticed she didn't seem shy about doing it in front of him now, not careless, but not hiding like before. Trust maybe, in small measure. He handed her his blue work shirt. "Wear this until it's dry." She pulled it on, the sleeves long past her hands, the hem brushing her knees. "You have other shirts?" she asked. "Got 2, he said. "I'll manage." They ate by the creek, hard bread and jerky, before moving on. The road ahead climbed to a ridge with a wide view of the valley below. From there, Cole could see the faint line of a ranch road cutting toward a cluster of cottonwoods in the distance. "We'll make camp there," he said. "Water, maybe some shelter." By the time they reached it, the sun was dropping low. The cottonwoods stood around a slow bend in the creek, their shade deep and cool. An old line shack sat nearby, weathered but still standing. Cole checked the door, hinges groaning, and found the inside dusty but sound. A narrow bunk, a wood stove, and enough space for them both. He dropped his gear inside, then went back to the wagon. Tahana was standing at the edge of the creek, watching the last light on the water. When she turned toward him, he saw something in her face had eased. "This place is quiet," she said. "For now," Cole answered, "and quiet's worth keeping." That night, the fire in the stove pushed back the chill. They sat at the small table, eating in the kind of silence that wasn't heavy anymore. When she met his eyes across the flicker of the lamplight, there was no challenge in it. Just a steady look that felt like the start of something neither of them had put into words yet. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was closer than it had been yesterday. And for both of them, that was enough to keep moving forward. The morning at the line shack broke clear and cool, the sky a pale blue that promised heat later in the day. Cole was outside before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, tightening the cinch on the team and checking the wagon's axle grease. Tahana emerged from the doorway a few minutes later, his coat still over her shoulders, her hair braided back from her face. She looked more rested than he'd seen her yet. Inside, the stove's fire had gone cold, but the air still held the faint smell of last night's bread and coffee. Cole set a fresh pot on the coals while she stepped outside to wash at the creek. He watched her for a moment, not staring, just noting how she always kept her eyes moving, scanning the tree line and the slope above the water. It wasn't the behavior of someone timid. It was habit, born of years never feeling safe. They ate quickly, bread, dried meat, coffee, then decided to stay put long enough to mend some gear. Cole's saddle blanket needed patching, and Tahana's shift, now dry, had more than one tear that would get worse if left alone. She worked at the repairs without being told, stitching while Cole sharpened his knife on a wet stone. By mid-morning, the quiet was broken. It started as a faint vibration in the air, hooves, far off. Cole's head came up instantly, eyes narrowing toward the slope to the east. Tahana noticed his change in posture and set the needle down without a word. "Stay inside," Cole said, already stepping to the wagon. He took the rifle from its rack and leaned it against the wall, then unhooked the revolver from his belt and checked the cylinder. He didn't aim to use it unless he had to, but he wasn't going to be caught unprepared. The riders came into view a minute later. 3 men, each moving at a steady lope, not in a hurry, but not wandering either. Their clothes were trail-worn, but the way they scanned the ground told Cole they weren't casual travelers. He recognized one of the faces from Las Cruces, the man who'd laughed outside the back room door. They pulled up about 50 yards from the shack, the leader keeping his horse in place, while the other 2 fanned slightly, trying to take measure of the place. Cole slamping into view on the porch, rifle in hand, his stance loose but ready. "Morning," the leader called, his tone oily, like someone trying to play polite after already making up his mind. Cole didn't answer. The man grinned. "We're looking for a girl, Apache, small. Might have been wearing a shift the last time we saw her. You seen anyone like that?" Cole kept his voice even. "No one here you need to worry about." The man's eyes flicked toward the shack. "'Cause word is she left town awful sudden. Be a shame if she ran into trouble out here." Cole didn't move. "You're the trouble you ride on. That's the only warning you get." A beat of silence stretched. The man's grin tightened, but he didn't push forward. Instead, he spat in the dirt, jerked his chin to the others, and turned his horse. "We'll be seeing you, freight man." Cole watched until they disappeared over the rise. He didn't relax. They'd be back, and next time they wouldn't come with just 3. Inside, Tahana stood by the window, her eyes fixed on where the riders had gone. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "No," Cole agreed, "but neither will I." She studied him as if measuring how far she could trust that promise. "You could leave me," she said. "Ride on. Let them take me." Cole shook his head. Not going to happen. For a long moment, she didn't reply. Then she went back to the table, picked up her sewing, and began stitching again. Small, precise movements, each one sharper than before. By evening, Cole had made a decision. "We move at first light," he said. Find a place where they'd have to think twice before coming after us. Tahana didn't ask where. She only nodded. For the first time, she seemed to accept that wherever they were headed next, they'd be going there together. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of dust from the east. Cole knew it meant riders on the move somewhere beyond sight. It only hardened his resolve. If they wanted to take her, they'd have to come through him. And that wasn't going to happen while he still drew breath. The first light of day hadn't yet reached the tops of the cottonwoods when Cole finished saddling the team. The air was cold enough that his fingers stung on the leather straps. He moved fast, but without noise, every motion deliberate. If the men from yesterday had camped nearby, he didn't want to give them time to close the gap. Tahana stepped out of the shack as he was checking the wagon traces. She'd braided her hair tight, the ends hanging over his blue shirt, which she still wore under the trail coat. Her shift, now mended, was folded neatly and tucked into the bundle she carried. She looked at him once, then scanned the tree line the same way he did, head turning in slow arcs, eyes cutting through the shadow. "You slept?" Cole asked. "Some," she said. "Enough." They climbed onto the wagon bench, and Cole gave the reins a light snap. The team pulled them back onto the narrow track north. The creek ran alongside for a mile before veering west, and after that, the land opened into rolling grass cut by dry washes. Cole kept the team at a steady trot. He didn't speak for the first hour, his eyes staying on the trail ahead, but his thoughts kept circling the same point. There was no telling how far these men were willing to chase, and no guarantee the law in the next town would be willing to step in. If they were going to make it through this, they needed to put real distance between themselves and Las Cruces. By mid-morning, the sun was climbing fast. Cole slowed the team to let them breathe, pulling off the track toward a cluster of mesquite for shade. They dismounted, and Tahana dropped down lightly from the bench, stretching her legs. He noticed she carried herself differently now, still cautious, but with less of that tightly wound tension in her shoulders. While he watered the horses, she took the canteen and rinsed her hands, then moved to the back of the wagon and began checking the lashings on the supplies. Cole watched for a moment before joining her. "You've traveled like this before," he said. "Not with a wagon," she replied, "but I know how to make things stay where they're meant to." Her answer was simple, but it filled a gap in what he knew of her. She'd been moved from place to place, but she wasn't unfamiliar with travel itself, the endurance it took, the way to make a camp and break it down quickly. That made her more than a passenger. They ate a quick meal of bread and dried meat under the mesquite. Tahana tore her portion in half and handed the rest back to him. "You'll need it," she said. "I gave you the bigger share yesterday," he reminded her. She looked straight at him, and I noticed. By the time they moved on, the wind had shifted. Cole smelled dust before he saw it, a faint haze far behind them. He didn't point it out, but he lengthened the team's stride, pushing until the track curved into a shallow canyon. The rock walls here threw cool shadows, and the narrow turns would hide them from distant eyes. Near midday, they stopped again, this time in the lee of a sandstone outcrop where a small seep trickled into a stone basin. Cole refilled the canteens while Tahana knelt to wash her face and arms. The trail coat slipped back on her shoulders, and she pulled it up again without looking at him. "Yesterday," she said, "when they came to the shack, you didn't even think before stepping out to face them." "I thought enough to have a rifle in hand," Cole said. "That's not what I mean." She turned toward him, water still glistening on her jaw. "You could have told them I wasn't here. Let them look somewhere else. And if they came inside and found you, then I'd have to kill them or watch them take you." That wasn't a choice. She studied him for a long moment, then looked down at the water. "No one stood like that for me before." He didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like more than he was ready to say, so he let it sit, and she didn't push. They made camp early that evening on a flat rise overlooking the trail. From here, they could see for miles in every direction. Cole built a small fire, shielded from sight by the wagon, and set a pot of beans to warm. Tahana stayed close, sorting their supplies and folding the mended shift into her bundle. When the food was ready, they sat shoulder to shoulder on the wagon's lowered tailgate. The sky above was deepening toward dusk, the air cooling fast. She finished her portion, then rested her hands in her lap. "When this is done," she said quietly, "what will you do?" "Depends on what done looks like," Cole said, "and if it's safe." He glanced at her. Then I'll go where I'm wanted. Her eyes held his for a moment longer than felt casual, and he realized she was giving him the same answer in her own way without saying it outright. Later, when they turned in, the night air was cold enough that the bedrolls had to be pulled close to the fire. They slept near each other for warmth, not touching, but not far. Cole stayed awake for a while, listening for distant hooves. None came. For now, they were ahead. How long they could stay that way was still a question, but he was starting to think the answer mattered to him for reasons that had nothing to do with the chase. The next morning came with a hard wind out of the west, carrying a fine grit that got into the seams of the wagon canvas and stung at their eyes. Cole rose early, tightening every strap and cover before they set out. He wanted to put more miles between themselves and the last camp. He hadn't seen riders yesterday, but the dust haze on the horizon still sat in his mind. Tahana emerged from the bedroll, her braid loose from the night's sleep, the blue shirt collar turned up against the wind. She handed him the canteen without being asked, a small gesture, but one that told him she was settling into the rhythm of the trail. They rolled out before the sun cleared the low hills. The track was rough here, scattered with rock and patches of loose sand. Cole kept the team moving but spared them when the wheels sank into soft ground, climbing down to walk alongside until the earth firmed up again. Tahana followed his lead without complaint, stepping down to push at the wagon frame when it needed the extra weight off. By midday, they found a shallow gully with a few cottonwoods bending in the wind. Cole watered the horses and checked the back axle. Tahana knelt beside him, pointing at a cracked leather strap on one of the harness traces. "That will give out soon," she said. He ran his hand over the tear and nodded. "Good eye." From the toolbox, he pulled a short length of rawhide and set to replacing the strap. She held the harness steady for him without being told, her fingers firm but careful. When the work was done, they shared a cold meal, bread softened in water and strips of dried meat. It wasn't much, but it was quick, and they needed the daylight. As they ate, Tahana glanced toward the south, her face tightening. "I hear something," she said. Cole listened. At first it was just the wind, then a faint thud, uneven but steady, hooves, far off but closing. He stood, scanning the ridgeline. 3 riders appeared against the pale sky, moving at a trot. "They're back," he said quietly. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice calm but low. "Get us out of sight." He didn't waste another word. Cole led the team down into the gully, steering toward a break in the bank where the wagon could pass. The ground here was soft, with last season's fallen leaves muffling their sound. He found a narrow side cut between 2 ridges, deep enough to hide the wagon from view. They waited. The horses shifted restlessly, ears flicking at the wind. Tahana crouched beside the wagon wheel, eyes fixed on the gap in the ridge. Minutes later, the riders passed above them, silhouettes against the sky. One slowed, scanning the valley floor, but none looked down into the cut. The sound of hooves faded when they were gone. Cole exhaled. "We'll stay off the main trail from here." The detour was slower. They picked their way through uneven ground, crossing dry washes and cutting through stands of mesquite. The sun was low by the time Cole spotted a stone outcrop with a deep overhang, enough shelter for both of them and the wagon. They set camp under the rock. The fire was small, just a glow in the lee of the stone. While the beans warmed, Tahana fetched water from a seep nearby. When she came back, she stood watching him for a moment before speaking. "You could have fought them today," she said. "Instead, you hit us." "Fight when you have to," Cole replied. "Hide when it keeps you alive." Her eyes stayed on him, measuring the words. "And you'd hide again for me?" "For as long as I have to." The silence that followed wasn't empty. She sat beside him, close enough their shoulders touched, and neither moved away. They ate like that, speaking little. The wind outside the overhang had died by full dark, leaving only the soft crack of the fire and the steady rhythm of their breathing. Before they turned in, Tahana pulled the mended shift from her bundle and set it beside the bedroll. "In the morning I'll wear this again," she said. "Not because I owe them shame, but because it's mine." Cole gave a single nod. "Then it stays yours." That night they slept closer than before, the cold pushing them toward the same blanket. No words passed, no promises spoken. But when Cole woke and once in the deep hours, her hand was resting lightly against his arm. He didn't move it away. They still had distance to cover and men behind them. But for the first time since Las Cruces, the thought of reaching the end of the road didn't feel impossible. It felt like something they could choose together. They broke camp before the first light reached the lip of the overhang. The air was damp from a night breeze that had carried the scent of wet earth. Cole had them moving north within minutes, staying off the main track just as he promised. The ground was rough, but it kept them hidden from open sight. Tahana rode beside him on the wagon bench, wearing her mended shift under his coat, the braid from last night still neat against her back. She said little, her eyes scanning the ridges ahead the way his did. It wasn't just his fight anymore. She was part of it, reading the land for threats the same way he was. By mid-morning, the trail narrowed into a rocky pass with sheer walls rising on both sides. Cole didn't like it, too many blind spots. He urged the team forward but kept one hand near the rifle laid across his knees. Halfway through, the sound came. Hooves, fast, echoing between the walls. "Down," he said sharply. Tahana slid from the bench into the bed of the wagon, crouching low under the canvas. Cole halted the team, eyes locked on the curve ahead. Moments later, 3 riders burst into view, the same men from before. Their horses threw dust and sparks off the stone. The leader pulled up about 20 yards away, a revolver resting loose in his hand. "Told you we'd be seeing you, freight man." His eyes flicked toward the wagon bed. "She's coming with us." Cole didn't move from the bench. "She's my wife," he said evenly. The man smirked. "Piece of paper won't stop me." "Maybe not," Cole replied. "But this will." His hand shifted just enough for the rifle's barrel to clear his knee. The other 2 riders spread out slightly, trying to flank him in the narrow space. Tahana's voice came from under the canvas, low but steady. "If you shoot, they'll kill you before you can reload." "I know," Cole said without looking back. He swung the rifle toward the leader's chest, finger resting against the trigger. For a moment, no one moved. The wind through the pass was the only sound. Then the leader's smirk thinned. "Ain't worth dying over today," he muttered. He jerked his chin, and the 3 of them wheeled their horses, pounding back the way they'd come. Cole waited until the sound faded before lowering the rifle. "Stay down until I say." When she climbed back onto the bench, Tahana's eyes were sharp. "You didn't have to tell him I was your wife." "I did," Cole said. It was the only thing that made him hesitate. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If you're going to claim it to keep me safe, you might as well mean it." The rest of the day passed in tense silence. They stayed off the open road, stopping only once for water. Cole knew the men weren't gone for good. They'd regroup and try again. But each time they failed, it made them more likely to get reckless. That could be turned to his advantage. By late afternoon, they found a sheltered hollow near a stand of willows. The creek there ran clear and cold, and the ground was soft with grass. It was the safest spot they'd had in days. Cole unhitched the team while Tahana started a small fire. As the beans warmed, she sat across from him, the firelight painting her face in shifting gold. "You risked your life twice for me now," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I'll keep doing it until there's no need." Her gaze didn't drop. "Then I choose to stay, not because I have to, because I want to." The words settled between them like a final piece falling into place. Cole didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached across the small space and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the back of it. She didn't pull away. That night they slept close under one blanket for warmth, not because the cold forced it, but because neither wanted the distance anymore. Outside, the creek kept its quiet run, and for the first time since Las Cruces, the thought of a future together felt less like an idea and more like something solid. Tomorrow would be the day to finish this, one way or another. They broke camp before the sun crested the eastern ridge. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, the creek beside them running in quiet ripples. Cole packed the last of their supplies into the wagon. Double-checking the lashings on the water barrel, the rifle laid across the bench. He didn't have to tell Tahana to keep watch. She was already standing on the small rise above camp, scanning the trail they'd come from. "They'll try again," she said as he joined her. Cole nodded. "Then today we end it." The unspoken truth between them was clear. Running forever wasn't a plan. If the men thought they could keep tracking them, they'd never stop. Cole had decided last night that the next encounter would be the last. They took the wagon north, keeping to the low ground where the mesquite and rock outcrops gave them cover. The morning passed without sign of trouble, but by noon, Cole spotted dust far behind them, just visible in the dry air. It grew steadily, the kind of dust only riders made when they were pushing their mounts hard. "They're closing," he said. Instead of running straight ahead, Cole steered the team toward a narrow box canyon he'd scouted days earlier. It was a place with only one entrance and a wide enough floor for the wagon to turn. He pulled in, positioning the wagon at an angle so it would block most of the opening. The rock walls on either side would force the riders to come at him head on. He tied off the team, loaded the rifle, and checked his revolver. Tahana stood beside him, holding the spare ammunition. "If you fall," she began. "I won't," he said, meeting her eyes. "But if I do, you take the team and ride hard for the ridge. Don't look back." She shook her head once, hard. "I don't leave you." The thunder of hooves rolled into the canyon mouth. 3 riders appeared, the leader out front, the same man who'd laughed outside the boarding house door. He reined in just outside rifle range, his smirk sharp. "You've cost me time and coin, freight man," he called. "Hand her over and I'll let you walk out." Cole didn't answer. The rifle came to his shoulder, steady as bedrock. The leader's smirk faltered. "You'd shoot me over an Apache girl?" "She's my wife," Cole said. "That's all you need to know." The man's face tightened, and he spurred his horse forward. Cole fired once. The shot hit the ground a foot in front of the horse's hooves, sending the animal rearing. The other 2 riders tried to fan out, but the narrow space forced them to slow. Cole fired again, this time grazing the nearest man's arm. The crack of the rifle echoed off the rock walls. Tihana's voice was calm behind him. "The next one, aim higher." The leader saw in Cole's eyes the certainty that there wouldn't be a warning shot left. He swore, yanked his reins, and turned. The other 2 followed, their retreat loud and fast, the sound of hooves fading into the distance until there was only the quiet of the canyon again. Cole lowered the rifle, breathing out slowly. Tahana stepped up beside him, her hand resting briefly on his arm. "It's finished," she said. "Yeah," Cole replied, though his eyes stayed on the canyon mouth for another moment before he was sure. They cleared the wagon from the entrance and headed north again, the afternoon light turning the rock walls gold. By nightfall, they reached a wide valley with scattered cottonwoods and a stream cutting through the grass. Cole stopped the team and looked over the land. "This could be home," he said. Tahana stepped down from the wagon, walking toward the stream. She stood there a moment, then turned back to him. "It's the first place that doesn't feel like I'm just passing through." That night, they made camp without the tension of the past days. The fire burned brighter, the sound of the creek close by. After they ate, Cole reached into the small chest under the bench and pulled out a strip of leather, twisting it into a loop. He held it out to her. "It's not silver," he said, "but it'll do until I can get one made." She took it, slipping it onto her finger. "It's enough." When they lay down, it wasn't for warmth or safety. It was because neither of them wanted the space between. Her head rested against his chest, his arm around her, and for the first time since Las Cruces, there was no need to plan for the next day's escape. By morning, they decided to stay in the valley. Cole would build a small cabin near the stream. Tahana would plant a garden. They would make it their own, not because they had to, but because they chose to. And when the wind carried the sound of distant riders sometime weeks later, it no longer mattered. Those men had already lost. The story of Cole Merrick and Tahana in the New Mexico wilderness in 1879 offers a timeless lesson about courage and the transformative power of standing up for another's dignity. Cole, a seasoned cargo guard, could have ignored Tahana's desperate situation in the Las Cruces Inn, avoiding the danger it posed. Instead, he chose to act, risking his life to protect her from those who saw her as property. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What does this story mean to you? Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for someone changed everything? Drop your stories in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join our community for more gripping tales that inspire us to live with courage and heart. Your support fuels these stories.